There are lots of videos and posts online that talk about the strongest overall monster in D&D. It's an interesting debate, and it will forever be an endless debate, because the upper end of D&D is not well defined. And actually, I think that's a good thing. I appreciate how, at extremely high levels, things break out of the conventions and they break free from the limitations that contain most of the levels of play. But what about the most powerful creature of CR0? We're talking about the least dangerous monsters in all the game. They have some pretty clear parameters, and they are very, very limited in their abilities. So it should be possible to narrow down on one that we can reasonably deem the strongest of the weakest. In 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, there are actually two subcategories of CR0 creatures, those that are worth 0 XP and those that are worth 10 XP. The ones that are worth no XP at all are the creatures that truly pose no threat or danger in any way. A seahorse, a fish, a frog, for example, they cannot deal any damage to a player character for obvious reasons. Gaining experience points in D&D has to do with facing some kind of danger and either defeating it or surviving it or cleverly thwarting it. The CR0 creatures that are worth 10 XP, however, do pose a tiny amount of danger. Even a mere hawk or a rat could hurt you a little bit, and if somehow many of them mobbed you all at once, it could possibly become even deadly, especially if a character is very low level or if the character's already wounded. So I thought this would be an interesting little quest to partake, and hopefully we will find the monster that we can deem to be the most powerful of the mere CR0s. Before I crack open the cages of hungry jackals and foul-tempered alley cats, I entreat you to show some support by hitting the like button, and if you're not already subscribed, make sure that you do. I would hate for a couple kobold commoners to dump sacks full of tiny spiders and crawling claws onto you while you're sleeping. So let's look through some of the candidates here. We've got things like the lemure. This is the lowest and most pathetic of all the devil creatures in D&D. It does have fairly high HP for a CR0 creature. Its attack isn't bad for CR0 either, but its speed and its AC are very, very low. It's kind of ooze-like. There's also the Awakened Shrub. Its attack is not as good as the Lemure's, and its hit points still are decently good for a CR0 creature. It does have this false appearance trait. I think that could potentially get a party into an ambush of lots of Awakened Shrubs. So that could potentially be a dangerous situation. There's the Juvenile Mimic. It does have a pretty good attack for CR0, definitely one of the better ones. And it has that infamous shape-shifting feature that mimics have, which gives it a high chance of attacking an unwitting adventurer. But its pitiful speed basically means that it is going to be doomed to defeat. The hyena is worth mentioning. It's a pretty effective CR0 monster. It has a really high speed of 50 feet, so it's very mobile. Its attack is really not bad for CR0, actually pretty good, particularly considering that it has pack tactics. So when we think of hyena encounters, there's going to be multiples of them. They're going to easily have advantage on their attacks, making their 2 hit quite high, and 1d6 damage per hit at CR0 is pretty good. There's the Awakened Rat. Now, this is a very weak monster physically, and it has 1 hit point, and it only does 1 damage. It's +0 to hit, so its attack is very, very minor. But it has human-level intelligence, so that means it's capable of employing sophisticated strategies, all while appearing as a mere rat and being able to hide in nooks and crannies. So I think an Awakened Rat, if implemented in a certain way, could be insidiously powerful for just a CR0. The Homunculus is another one that's worth looking at. Its attack is pretty good. It's +4 to hit, which is high for CR0. It's also very mobile. It has a 40-foot flying speed. It's got AC 13, which is about as good as you can expect for CR0. It just has 5 hit points, so it is pretty frail. What makes its attack powerful is not the actual amount of damage, it really just does 1 point of damage, but it inflicts the poison condition, and if the subject rolls low enough on their Constitution saving throw, they actually fall unconscious for 1d10 minutes. That's a pretty strong effect for just a CR0, so the homunculus, I think, is pretty high in the standing here. There is also the scorpion, another one that is very physically weak. It just has 1 hit point. It's literally just a regular little scorpion, and it only has a speed of 10 feet. It's really small, but it has quite a high potential max damage for a CR0 creature, dealing 1 piercing plus 1d8 poison damage, DC 9 con save for half on there. So that's actually a lot of damage for just a CR0 monster. But again, that's very weak defense. The 1 hit point, that's going to mitigate that quite a bit. So all these creatures that I've mentioned so far, they represent what I consider to be the strongest of the creatures that are truly CR0. What I mean is they fall within the guidelines of a CR0 monster as outlined in the Dungeon Master's Guide. But there are a few CR0 monsters that are notably more powerful, which I'm going to get into here. In truth, though, they are overpowered. They are objectively overpowered for their challenge rating. So while their official entries do state that they are CR0, in effect they are actually higher than that. The first one is actually just the goat, just a regular goat out of the monster manual. It has the highest potential max damage on a single hit for any CR0 creature due to its charge feature. So its ram attack is +3 to hit and 1d4 +1 damage, already good for a CR0 monster. If it charges at least 20 feet in a straight line right before it hits a creature, it deals an additional 1d4. So that's 2d4 +1 damage. On a single hit, no other CR0 creature can deal quite that much damage. It also has a speed of 40 feet, which makes it pretty mobile. I would probably rate the goat as actually a CR1/8 monster. Next is the Knucklehead Trout. Another monster that it says CR0, but I would actually rate it as a CR1/8. With AC 12 and 7 hit points, it's decently hardy for a CR0 monster. Of course, it can't do anything on land, but in the water it swims 30 feet, so quite mobile in an aquatic environment. It can attack with either a bite or a tail slap. It's +4 to hit and 1d4 +2 damage. So pretty substantial. Again, I would give this an actual CR1/8 rating. If you plug these statistics into the monster creation guidelines, you are going to get a CR1/8 result, not a CR0. The next monster is even a bit stronger. It's the Almirage from the Tomb of Annihilation. I do want to focus on this one a little bit more because we're starting to get into quite strong for CR0 monsters. It's basically a rabbit, but it's large. It's kobold-sized. It's small-sized. So it's like a rabbit or a hare. It has a single horn spiking out from its forehead. It's a burrowing creature. Generally, they're timid, but they can be provoked. They can be manipulated by spellcasters, or maybe they are going to defend their territories or they're young, so they can attack, and they'll go by spearing their adversaries. Their attack is +5 to hit, dealing 1d4 +3 damage. That is probably the highest damage for any CR0 creature if we talk about the round by round average amount of damage output that a creature is going to have. They're sometimes kept as trained pets, even magical familiars, though they truly are beasts. They're not fae or celestials or some other more fantastical creature type. While I do think that Almirage looks kind of stupid, I discovered that it's actually drawn from mythology. It has connections to a creature, the Almiraj, coming from medieval Arabic literature. So if we analyze its stats, we do the number crunching, it's actually going to come out to be a CR1/4 monster. Its defensive rating is CR0, its offensive rating is CR1/2, so we average that out to a CR1/8. It really surprises me. It's rare for a 5th edition creature to be much stronger than its indicated CR. Usually 5e monsters are actually on the weaker end of their CR. But fighting a group of these unicorn rabbits could quickly turn deadly for characters at very low levels. Aside from its strong, actually overpowered offenses, it's really mobile. It has a 50-foot speed, so it's going to be sure to catch up with basically any character. The major downside of the Almirage is its low intelligence score. It only has an intelligence of 2, so it doesn't have any higher cognition. It's no smarter than an actual rabbit. So in direct physical combat, a pack of these creatures would probably demolish a first or second level party, but the characters are always going to have this major upper hand in terms of planning and strategy and tool usage. But I should point out that animal level intelligence does not actually justify the creature's CR0 rating, not at all. Monsters in D&D aren't really handled that way. A zombie is extremely unintelligent, but its CR doesn't get lowered because of that, neither for an ogre or for an ooze. If anything, their CRs somewhat overestimate them. So I really do have to wonder why the Almirage was underestimated in its CR. It's a question that I just kind of find myself wondering. None of my immediate searches have landed any explanation as to why this monster was overpowered in its design. Next, we come to the Living Demiplane from Rime of the Frost Maiden. It's actually a demiplane spell that has somehow become a little bit self-aware. It's this rectangular shape, and it's classified as medium-sized, though it is about as big as something could possibly be for a medium-sized creature. And it goes slinking along. It can go along the ground. It can also climb along kind of any solid surface. And it is described as groaning softly as it moves along. Whenever it comes across creatures that it can fit through its doorway, it just tries to suck creatures into itself, and it ends up imprisoning them or depositing them into its extra-dimensional space, like its little pocket dimension. So it has lots of condition immunities, it has magic resistance, it has bits about its dimensional form, about how it can be in the same space as other creatures, and this extra-dimensional chamber effect that I described, where it can try to pull creatures into itself. It is a DC 10 dexterity saving throw to avoid that effect. If you fail, you get deposited inside its little demiplane prison. This living demiplane has 31 hit points. That is so high it is unheard of for a CR0 creature. It is truly one of the most interesting CR0 creatures. Really, I love it. It by itself actually cannot deal any damage, though if it traps a creature inside of itself, and that creature has no magical weapons and no spells, particularly no cantrips that they can cast over and over, the creature's eventually going to die of thirst or of hunger, because the interior of the living demiplane can only be damaged or broken through with something magical. Also, if you can imagine the living demiplane combined with allied monsters, it's going to become much more of a threat. It basically becomes its own little mobile banishment effect. I'm really just utterly shocked that this creature is rated at CR0. I do admit it is a difficult creature to assign a CR. It doesn't have any damage value, so it makes it difficult to figure out what its actual CR would be. Maybe CR 1/4 or 1/2? Beyond its stats, though, a living demiplane just doesn't seem like something that would be CR0. You know, the name alone sounds so epic. I did try to reason out how we could get the offensive rating for this creature. Here are my notes. It was kind of a rabbit hole, so I'm not going to go down that any longer. But there is still one more creature that is officially rated at CR0, which I think takes the crown for the most powerful, which is the Vistana Commoner out of the Curse of Strahd. It is one of the most interesting CR0 creatures, and really just one of the most interesting general NPCs in all of 5e. The Vistani are gypsy-like people from the gothic horror setting of Ravenloft. They have a couple abilities that all of the Vistani share. They have a curse effect in which they can curse a creature within 30 feet of itself. It is a DC 10 wisdom saving throw to avoid this. And the Vistana actually will choose whatever curse effect he wants to impose upon the subject. They range from minor things to major things. The curse could make a target unable to perform a certain kind of little physical act like writing or casting spells that have somatic components, or it can change their appearance to look sinister. It can make an item in their possession suddenly just disappear. It can make the target vulnerable to any one damage type of the Vistana's choice. Or the Vistana could pick one of the target's ability scores, and the target always has disadvantage on ability checks and saving throws associated with that ability score. Or it can unattune a target for one of its magic items and prevent it from being able to attune to it anymore. Or the target becomes blinded and deafened. The drawback for the Vistana is that when the curse ends, the Vistana suffers psychic damage. Now this ranges from a mere 1d6 for the minor options of the curse, all the way up to 5d6 for those stronger ones. So it is something that the Vistana would really have to have some kind of animosity or good reason to place a curse onto somebody. The curse, though, does last until it gets removed by a remove curse spell or greater restoration, some other kind of similar magic that can truly end a permanent type of curse. The Vistana Commoner, like all the Vistani, also has an evil eye feature that he can use once per short rest. The Vistana targets a creature within 10 feet that the Vistana can see and can either do the spell of Animal Friendship, Charm Person, or Hold Person. Yeah, paralysis. Again, it's a DC 10 on the saving throw. So those are some very strong effects, potentially incredibly, extremely strong effects for a mere CR0. A group of Vistani commoners could potentially devastate a low-level party. Imagine if just two of them put a blindness curse and a vulnerability curse onto a single player character, especially a first level or a second level player character. Oh my goodness. Aside from their powerful and dynamic curse and evil eye abilities, the Vistani are also very stylish. They're a very flavorful group of NPCs in D&D, which gives them a certain depth that adds a lot to the world building of that setting. And I think you could easily put the Vistani into your own setting or just other settings in D&D in general. So that's it. I give the Vistana Commoner the crown for the strongest of the CR0 creatures. All of this has actually inspired me to make some CR0 monsters, so I'm going to put that into my upcoming newsletter here. There's a link down to my Patreon in the video description. Head on over there, check out the Lore Keeper tier. Every month I have a newsletter that comes out, and those that are Lore Keepers, they get additional content, specifically monsters, stats, art, lore. And every month I do a selection to get monster concepts from patrons of mine at the Lore Keeper tier, and I take your concept and develop it into a full creature with, again, the stats, the illustrations, the lore and the plot hooks, the flavor text. I also invite the selected patrons to participate in my monthly Bard stream, the live stream that I'll do where you can either appear as a guest on the stream, have a conversation with me, ask me questions, or you can submit topics or questions to me in writing and I'll address those during the stream. There's more than that on my Patreon. There's actually a bunch there. There's maps, there's free content. So go take a look at that, and I encourage you to join on and become one of my supporters there. So there you have them. Those are the strongest CR0 monsters of 5e as best I can figure. A few of them are blatantly overpowered, and how they managed to slip by are mysteries that might never get solved. So that's all for now. I'm going to go feed my pet quippers and hunt down some shrieker mushrooms. I'll see you in the next video soon, and may your adventures be many.